Hello, everybody. Welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. It is September 25th, 2013. And if you're watching us live on MPTS or if you're streaming us online at ipmnation.com/MCUTV, very glad to have you with us. Little Mel will be joining us in a moment, and I think we have a guest. We're trying to get a guest on the line who's also going to be joining us, who I'm very, very interested to speak with. He's not local to the area, so he'll be doing the call-in thing. But if you are watching us online, by the way, of course, we do have an active chat room at ipmnation.com/MCUTV, so you can communicate with us that way. Of course, you can also call if you're watching us. If you're watching us live, or text. And the studio's falling apart in my hands. I'm just going to put this like that because this monitor is not working very well anyway. Everything's fuzzy on it. So anyway, we don't need that. So live television, my friends. Anyway, so we're going to be chatting with Walter E. Williams once we get him on the phone. He's world-renowned, from what I understand, economist, and it's interesting to me to speak with an actual economist about the economy. And what I mean by that is regular viewers of this show may have heard me complain about how one of the problems I have with being an ideologue, whether you're a liberal or a conservative, is that people very often assume that whatever ideology they align themselves with is correct on absolutely everything 100% of the time. And whatever ideology they disagree with is wrong on absolutely everything 100% of the time. And it doesn't matter if they know about an issue or not, and that's particularly true with the economy. People assume that their party knows how the economy works. So very interesting to speak with an actual economist.
Okay, you're on hold.
Oh, I got him. Mr. Williams, is that you on the line?
That is correct.
Hi, Walter E. Williams. Welcome to the show. Sorry about a little bit of confusion with the phone situation, but thanks for calling in. I'm very very excited to speak with you today.
Okay.
And where are you calling from, sir?
Well, I'm calling from Valley Forge, Pennsylvania.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Okay, I've been through Pennsylvania, but I can't say that I've been to Valley Forge, though obviously a very historically significant place. I want to ask you about you obviously you're an economist, and
yeah.
I'm very interested in talking to you about you support the libertarian view on economics. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, you can say that, or the free market view, or the view of many of our founding fathers.
Okay. And have you, throughout your career, because you've been at this a long time, have you always taken that viewpoint from the beginning, or is that something that's kind of evolved over time?
Well, I guess through my professional career, I've always been I call myself sometimes a Jeffersonian liberal.
Okay.
But however, I at one time I believed in things like the minimum wage, and I got my education at UCLA, and I just had professors say, "Well, look, Walter, you care more about intentions or effects of the law," and when they gave me material to look at the effects of the minimum wage, and then I changed my mind.
Sure.
This happened with a number of topics, and so what you're talking about, I've been teaching for 45 years.
Wow. Okay.
So I've had a lot of time to think about ideas and my views and ideas of others.
Sure. I don't know much about your history. Did you grow up in Pennsylvania, or have you moved around?
No, I grew up in North Philadelphia.
Okay.
In the Richard Allen Housing Project. Matter of fact, a lot of my life, I had my good friend and colleague Tom Soul, and also my wife when she was alive, were after me for a number of years to write an autobiography.
Oh, no kidding.
And I have done so, and the autobiography is the title is Up From the Projects.
Okay. So you came from...
And it's also available at my, you can see it at my webpage. My webpage is walterewilliams.com, so there's a lot about my life at that page, walterewilliams.com.
Fantastic. Now, have you written other books as well?
Oh, about 12 other books.
Oh, wow, okay. Now, so coming from your back...
Professional articles. I've written about 150 articles and professional mills.
Oh, okay. And coming from your background, as you say, the title of your autobiography, Up From the Projects, it sounds like when you talk about, unlike a lot of economists, and, everyone arrives at their conclusions however they do, but you obviously came from a poor background in kind of a poor, I assume at the time that was kind of a poor area of that city?
Oh, yeah, it was very poor. I was growing in a housing project. I guess I lived there from, I was born in 1936, but I lived in that Richardson housing project for about from 1945 till 1956 or 57.
Okay.
And my life is really not that much different from Americans in general. One of the rather remarkable things that goes unappreciated about our country is just because you know where a person ended up in life, you can't be sure about where he started.
Mm-hmm.
That is, right now I'm probably in the top 4 or 5% of income earners in the country, but I was not there. I didn't start out that way.
Sure.
So there's such economic mobility in our country where you can start out poor or middle class and reach the top. And the matter of fact, the very wealthy people today, are not the Rockefellers, the Ford family, or the Vanderbilts, or the Carnegies. It's it was Steve Jobs when he was alive, or Bill Gates. It's all new money, and so that's one of the rather remarkable things about our country. In Europe, for the most part, if you don't start at the top, you're not going to get to the top.
Mm-hmm. Is that becoming more difficult? I hear a lot about upward mobility is becoming more and more challenging in this country as more and more of the wealth is concentrated at the top. Is that true in your estimation?
Well, yes, it is, and I think that there are many regulations that make it more difficult for
mm-hmm.
people to move up the ladder. For example, suppose in let's say in 1930, that you take a poor, illiterate Italian or Irishman in New York City. If he wanted to get into the taxi cab business, he would just go get a used car and put the word taxi on the outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Today, if a person wanted to get into the taxi cab business in New York, he would first have to go out and buy a $700,000 license.
Yeah.
And they call them medallions in New York.
Yep.
And so, or in Boston, I think the taxi license price is over $100,000 to get a license.
Wow.
And so, what this does, what these regulations, and that was just one example, what these regulations do, they cut off the bottom rungs of the economic ladder.
Mm-hmm.
The kids, I as a young, I've been working since I was 12. I had jobs like, you pull into a gasoline station years ago, there's a kid to wash your window, there's a kid to pump the gas for you, and to check the air in your tires. And today the gasoline stations are self-service, and it's not because Americans of the day like to smell gasoline fumes. It's because the minimum wage law has eliminated that kind of job. Or, again, when I was a youngster, a lot of my kids, I never had the job, but they were ushers in theaters. Today, you don't find ushers in theaters, and it's not because Americans of the day want to stumble down the aisles in the park to find their seat. And so there are many the kids who live in the Richard Allen housing project today, they don't have the chances to get out that I had. And
Mm-hmm.
matter of fact, everybody knows one of the kids that lived in the project with me. There was a neighbor of mine, and my mother used to say, don't be like that kid. He's silly and he's foolish. He's not going to get anywhere. And she was talking about Bill Cosby.
No kidding.
and Mom was right about most things. She was wrong about that.
Very interesting.
So the point is that we have it's more and more difficult to move up the economic ladder today
mm-hmm.
than yesteryear. For example, you take in New York City years ago. How do you think Bloomingdale started out? They were peddlers, or J.C. John Cash Penny He was a peddler. Now today, in some cities, peddlers get arrested.
Yeah. Why is it? Why have we arrived at this point? Is it too much? Is it just the government regulating business too much? Is that really is it as simple as that, or is it a broader issue?
What people do, they go to their congressman or they go to the legislature, and they say, "Look, why don't you cut off competition? Why don't you have a occupational licensing so I can charge higher prices and I can keep other people out?" They won't say it that way.
Right.
They will say to promote public health and safety and all this kind of crap, and have various kinds of regulations to rig the economic market.
Well, sure. And as they're saying that, they're handing them a check for their
political campaigns.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, while they're saying that, they're handing them a check for their political campaign. And I always say on this show that, when we send people to Washington, D.C., and obviously this happens at state and local governments to varying degrees, I'm sure, but particularly federally, when we send people to Washington, D.C., when we vote for them, what we're actually voting for is whatever set of lobbyists and special interest groups, et cetera, actually fund those campaigns. Those people don't represent us. They represent whoever owns them, whoever bought them, and I agree. It's all a lot of this is a case of where businesses rig the system, like you said.
Well, not only businesses, it's the average American citizen. If you are what state are you in?
We're in New Hampshire.
Imagine that Walter Williams is running for the Senate in New Hampshire, and I go back and forth across the state of New Hampshire, and I tell the citizens, look, I've read the United States Constitution. I know what the Constitution authorizes Congress to do. So if you elect me to the Senate, don't expect for me to bring back aid to higher education, billions of dollars in aid to higher education, prescription drugs, farm subsidies. Do you think I would get elected to the Senate from New Hampshire? No, I wouldn't, because I would not be doing what the people of New Hampshire want me to do.
Right.
And what the people of New Hampshire want me to do is to use the power of my office to take what belongs to one American and bring it back to them. And the tragedy of it is that the people in New Hampshire would be absolutely right not electing me to the Senate, because if I don't bring back all these goodies or other people's money, or it doesn't mean that the citizens of New Hampshire will pay a lower federal income tax. All that it means is that the citizens of Vermont will get it instead.
Right.
And so once legalized theft begins, it pays for everybody to participate.
Do you think that things like the welfare system and perhaps even unemployment insurance, would it be better if those were, maybe you don't think they should exist at all, but would it be better, and I'm not a conservative, but one of the conservative principles that I hear a lot that I agree with is that these things should be handled at the state level or the local level and get the federal government completely out of welfare and even unemployment and some of these other social programs, localize them, because local governments can, facilitate them better and make sure they run properly.
Local governments are far more responsive to the citizens than the federal government.
Right.
And so, to the extent, and that's, matter of fact, that's what the founders envisioned. That is, this is why we have the 9th and 10th Amendments. And the 10th Amendment says that powers not delegated to the federal government belong to the people and the states.
How do you feel?
But the 10th Amendment means little or nothing today.
Right. How do you feel about, in terms of, we talked about how cities, for example, like New York, how they strangle anyone from getting into the taxi cab business because they make the barrier of entry so difficult. How do you feel about the government regulating major corporations? And I assume you don't like the corporate welfare that goes on, but what about environmental regulations?
Well, environmental regulations, it makes sense that to have some laws or some regulations saying that that you can't put coal soot on my house or on my clothing. So it violates my private property rights. But very often, environmental regulations are used to refrigerators against their competition. Businesses use it, and businesses use many laws that sound good on the surface.
Sure.
To rig the game, take a supermarket. A guy owns say I own the supermarket chain, a huge supermarket chain. I might go to the legislature in New Hampshire and I say, well, look, in the interest of public safety and food and good food protection, protect the food, I think we need to have a law saying that you need walk-in refrigerators that keep food at a constant 20 degree. We need to have boiling water to wash off the knives, to wash off this, that keep water at a very, very hot to kill germs. And I make other regulations. Now, people say, oh, gee, Walter Williams is a very good public-spirited person. But no, what I'm doing, I'm trying to raise the cost of your getting into business and compete against me.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So if I make all those regulations, and for somebody like you who might want to get into the supermarket business to compete with me, it just raises your cost of doing so.
Sure, absolutely.
And I come out looking like a public-spirited person.
Yeah, no, that's a good insight. My political history is I was a Democrat. I grew up a Democrat for many years. Now I'm an independent. There are too many things, too many social issues that will prevent me from probably ever being a Republican, and I'm not ready to sign on to libertarianism either. But one of the things that drove me out of the Democratic Party is I became an entrepreneur myself, and starting IPMNation.com and whatnot, and I began to realize that there's something. The trouble with liberalism is, I agree with much of it. A lot of the social issues I agree with liberals on. I'm pro-choice, etc. But there's something weirdly just sort of inherently anti-business and anti-entrepreneur about their attitude. They don't seem to have any problem with regulations that are unnecessary and increasing bureaucracy, and like we have with Obamacare, which is I think we need healthcare reform. That's just not the way I would have done it. Liberals and the Democratic Party, they don't seem to have any idea that how difficult it is for someone starting a small business or trying to survive as a small business. How difficult it is.
You can make the same statement about Republicans and many conservatives. That is. The big problem is, you say that you're not a libertarian, but then that's okay. The big problem in our nation is that there is contempt for peaceable, voluntary exchange. That's the libertarian vision. That is, we want people to be able to engage. For example, let's go back to the cab business. If I want to drive you to the airport and my cab is safe and I have insurance, well, who else's business is it other than you and me?
Right.
Why should some third party come in and say, well, look, no, William, you just can't voluntarily, you guys can't make that contract. Well, you need to obey this law, you need to have that law, you need to buy a license, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, anyone who's ever had a storefront business in any size city, whether it's a small town or a big city, you get into the when you get into the zoning laws, I mean, it's just crazy. And again, this is one of the things that drove me away from liberalism, because they seem to love this stuff, where you have to have, your sign has to be a certain size, and it has to be a certain height off of the ground, and it can only be these specific colors, and just crazy stuff that you kind of look at it and you go, why do they even care about, my sign has to be exactly this size and exactly this height and these colors, and what does it matter to them? But there's always some, what was it Reagan said, the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
And that's right. And so, but the point, one of the points is that these people, and they're in both the Democrats and the Republicans and the liberals and the conservatives. Mm-hmm. There are people in our world, but in our country, they think that they have a monopoly on wisdom. They think that they know better, and they think that they have been ordained forcibly impose their wisdom on the rest of us. And these people have utter contempt for the free market and voluntary peaceful exchange. And the reason is that tyrants do not trust that people behaving voluntarily will do what the tyrant thinks that they ought to do. Mm-hmm. And so what they want to do is to have economic planning or industrial planning. They want to plan our lives, and they want to say, look, and if you don't obey us, I mean, ultimately we will shoot you.
Right. It's funny too, because whenever I hear the word planning in this context, I always think of planning boards. You know, a lot of towns, they have these planning boards, and it seems like the planning board really plans for nothing, because all they do is make sure that, you know, if Walmart wants to come in and open a store, or whomever, you know, a big business like Walmart or a small business or whatever, well, we're going to give them a million hoops to jump through, basically making sure that they can't open, that they can't create any jobs. Yeah. And you look at the...
I'll give you a definition of planning, economic planning,
yeah,
that will last you the rest of your life.
Okay.
Economic planning is nothing more than the forcible superseding of somebody else's plan by the powerful elite. Mm-hmm. For example, my daughter might plan to work for the hardware store guy down the street for $4 an hour. She says it's okay. He says it's okay. Her mother says it's okay. And I say it's okay. But the powerful elite will say, we're going to supersede that plan because it's not being transacted at the prices we think it ought to be, namely $7.25 an hour. Mm-hmm. Or I might plan to buy a Honda motorcycle from a Japanese producer. And the powerful elite will say, Williams, we're going to supersede your plan through tariffs and quotas because we think you ought to buy a Harley Davidson. And so so that's at the core of much of what we see in the political arena. And see, the only difference, you know what, it was H.L. Mencken, and H.L. Mencken was a political satirist for the Baltimore Sun. And somebody asked him to give a definition of an election. And H.L. Mencken said, government is a broker in pillage, and every election is an advance auction on the sale of stolen goods. And that's H.L. Mencken.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you look at it, you know, how do politicians get into office? They don't get into office promising you that they're going to uphold the Constitution of the United States. They get into office promising you they're going to give subsidies, they're going to give aid to higher education, they're going to do all this. Mm-hmm. And so we see the bulk of the blame lies with the American people, because politicians are doing precisely what the American people want them to do, and you just can't blame it on businesses.
Right.
We're all members of an interest group.
Well, like I said, you know, it's when you elect these people to send them to Washington, you're really selecting someone to represent not your values and positions, but somebody else's, whoever owns that person. And it's amazing to me. You know what's interesting is when I say that to people, whether it's on this show or even just in casual conversation, very seldom does someone actively disagree with me. And I mean, once in a while someone will sort of challenge me on it, but then it's like, I wonder, okay, so if people don't, if this is one of the few things I'll say that no one seems to disagree with me on, why does everyone seem so willfully, and maybe willfully is the key word, why is everyone so willfully blind to it? Why does everyone accept it? Why do all these Republicans...
We're all a part of it.
Yeah.
We're all a part of it. We all are part of taking what belongs. Take for instance Social Security. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people think, well, that Social Security money coming to them is the money that they put away, and that's hogwash. What Social Security, when you receive a Social Security check, it comes out of some younger person paying into Social Security. That is, there is no trust fund. But if you tell somebody, look, if you tell these people that, look, Social Security is a fraud, it's a big Ponzi game, and in 2030 or 2035 it will not exist, it's going to implode. And if a politician says that, and tries to do something about Social Security, he'll be run out of town by these old people.
Very true. Yeah, no, that's absolutely.
So the point is, see, any politician concerned with 2030 and 2035 doing things that will be good for our country in the long run, he's going to be run out of business. He's going to be run out of town by all these vested interests.
Mm-hmm.
And again, look, the vested interests are you and I. If we pretend, well, no, it's just business, the vested interests, or just this group is the vested interest, well, we missed the boat. We all are part of this vested interest, and to save our country, we all have to be willing to take cuts.
Do you think that our government focuses too much, or the political discourse anyway that goes on is focused too much on social issues, and that becomes a distraction from these economic issues that obviously you as an economist are very concerned about, and that we should all be concerned about, because that's going to affect us all regardless of whether, some of these social policies, whatever happens there. If the economy crashes, and I don't mean what we saw in 2008, but really crashes and goes over the cliff, do you think people are too easily distracted from that?
Well, I think there are a whole lot of things that people are distracted from. Mm-hmm. That is, but I think that the basic thing, what we need to do is to recover a gross distrust of government. We need to have the kind of distrust of the United States Congress that our founders had. I mean, for example, just read through the Constitution, read through the Bill of Rights. Look at the language in the Bill of Rights. It says, the amendments to the Constitution, it says, Congress shall not disparage. Congress shall not infringe. Congress shall not prohibit. Congress shall not do many kind of things. Now, if the founders of our nation, if they did not think that Congress would do that, why in the world would they write it down?
Right.
They did not trust Congress. As a matter of fact, I suggest to people, when we die, and if at our next destination we see anything like a Bill of Rights, we know that we're in hell. Because a Bill of Rights in heaven would be an insult to God. It'd be saying we can't trust God.
Right.
And so this is what the American people need to do. We have to realize that government is our enemy, and that's what the founders recognized. They know that we needed some government, and this is why they try to keep it limited, because they knew we needed some government. But and as Thomas Paine said, government under the best of circumstances is a necessary evil. Under the worst of circumstances, an intolerable one.
What would be, in your mind, what would be the ideal sort of the ideal parameters of what government does from a libertarian point of view?
Well, I think the government should the most that the government should be doing is stopping me from taking your money. By reaching it, that is, the government should be preventing, in the business of preventing involuntary exchange. That is, they need to be in the business of preventing you from imposing any harm on me. But what government does is that government does the very things that that it was instituted to protect us against. Because what government does, it takes the money of one person and gives it to another to whom it does not belong. That is, if the government is going to give, let's say, aid to higher education, well, where's Congress getting that money? It's not the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus.
Right.
And they're not reaching in their own pockets, sending out the money. And so the only way government can give one American citizen $1 is to first, through intimidation, threats, and coercion, confiscate that dollar from some other American. And if you believe I'm being too loose with the terminology confiscation, you have April 15th, check me out on this. You tell the agents of Congress, namely the IRS, that I will pay for the constitutionally mandated functions of the federal government that are listed in Article 1, Section 8, but I'm not going to have money taken out of my pay to give to farmers, to give to students, to give to poor people, to give to foreign aid, and you will see all the intimidation threats that you want to see.
What about education?
That is we want. See, the point is that we want government to do those things.
Right.
condemn as an ordinary, despicable thief.
Sure.
That is, if I took somebody else's money by force to send somebody to college, you can condemn me as a thief.
Right. But some of this is necessary, right? I mean, practically speaking, because you have to pay for education for children, you have to pay for the roads. I mean, there has to be, there is some sort of a minimum that we have to set, right? I mean, I'm not asking. I'm not saying put a number on it.
We became the richest nation on the face of the earth, and public education did not begin, and it only began slightly in Boston until the late 1800s. Mm-hmm. And when somebody says, "Oh, you got to have this program," this is absolutely necessary. Let's say food stamps is absolutely necessary. And I ask you, when the poor Irish were coming here in the 1840s, fleeing the potato famine in Ireland, and landing on Ellis Island with just the clothes on their back, do you think there was a food stamp program for them?
Yeah.
And if there was not, how in the world did they make it?
Right. But
so when somebody tells me that you just have to have this program, I say, what did we do before? Mm-hmm. Look, I got to get ready to go.
Oh, do you have to leave us?
I've been really enjoyed talking to you, but I told your I guess the young lady that called that I could only stay for 20 minutes, and I've gone a half hour.
Oh, okay, I understand. Sorry to keep you. I do want to have you on again, though, sir, because this has been really interesting, and I do want to, at a future date, obviously, ask you about the Federal Reserve, and very interested to get your perspective on that. But before you go, do you want to mention your website one more time and where people can get your books?
WalterEWilliams.com.
Okay.
WalterEWilliams.com, and then also there's a little thing where you can sign up for my mailing list.
Oh, very good. Fantastic. Okay. All right, well, Walter E. Williams, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you again.
Right, talking to you.
All right,
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, so that was Walter E. Williams, an economist, and he's talking to us from Pennsylvania. So I'll pull up a couple things on my phone that we can talk about. Our computer situation here is a little rough. And while I do that, Little Mel is here, of course. She was out of the studio at the top of the show because we were trying to figure out how to get Walter on the phone because we're having a little technical issue with that, but it all worked out. Why don't you tell us, Mel, about what's coming up on your show, No Boundaries, Monday nights at 10:30 Eastern on IPMNation.com while I find this... I got to find an email here, but you got a couple big shows coming up.
I do. So this Monday on my show, I am going to be talking with Jessica Valenti. Jessica Valenti is a feminist activist, blogger, author, speaker. She is the proprietor of the website feministing.com. It's a blog website. She's written several books, The Purity Myth, Full Frontal Feminism, He's a Stug, She's a, don't know if I can say that word, but you can probably figure it out, and just a bunch of other ones. She's been on MSNBC, she's been on Anderson Cooper, she's been on the Colbert Report, and she's a huge influence of mine, because I'm a feminist, so she's a big influence, so I'm very excited to have her on, and that'll be this Monday at 10:30, IPMNation.com/NoBoundaries. Then on October 14th, some of you may have heard of a podcast called Welcome to the Night Vale. It is currently the #1 listened to podcast on iTunes. And I am going to be talking with Cecil Baldwin. He is the voice behind Welcome to the Night Vale. So I'll be talking to him on October 14th. So I'm really excited about that. And that'll also be on IPMNation.com/NoBoundaries.
What is Welcome to the Night Vale exactly? Because I keep hearing about it, but
Welcome to the Night Vale is like I said, it's a podcast, but it's a fictional podcast, and basically it is set in a fictional town of Night Vale, and it's set at a radio station, and it's the guy, and he's just talking about everything that's kind of going on in the town and the people in the town, and they have their weather report is them playing music and stuff, and it just follows kind of a storyline. Okay. And the fandom, from what I've been told, is quote, rabid.
Yes.
It's got a really big fandom. It's really, really popular. So I'm actually surprised that I was able to get an interview with him. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's very cool. How many episodes of that are there now? There's quite a few.
I think my last one was 36, maybe 36, 37. Yeah, I started doing it. I think last January. Or this January, rather, I started doing it, and I'm just, like, really, it's currently #1 on IPM Nation, which is, like, super, super awesome, and I have fun, and it's awesome, and you let me do it, Matt, so thanks.
Sure, and all the episodes are archived, you know,
Yes.
for anyone who wants
Yep.
to go back and check out everything. They're all there.
Yep.
IPMNation.com/no-boundaries. You can, they're all free to download, and
Yep.
or you can stream them at your leisure. So Walter wasn't able to stay with us for the full show, so we'll cover a couple things that we'll cover something specifically that has me I might come fully unleashed about this. Before I get to this little gem of an article here, I have something from the Tampa Bay Times that I'll read to you. It's very short, but let me give you a little background on something. One of the things, and actually in the very first episode of the radio edition of this show, I talked about it because it's you know, we all have, well, I shouldn't say we all. Some people are very apathetic, but most of us have issues that are
Apathy is
to
the
us.
biggest threat to this country.
That's right. Some of us have issues that are important to us, and some have issues that are very important, and some of us have issues that I like to call hot button issues, issues that really set us off and make us particularly angry. Ever since I was a child, I've been interested in politics from a frighteningly young age. I won't even tell you how young because you'll assume that something's wrong with me. But I've been interested in politics since I was a little kid. And one of the things that has been a hot button issue with me since I was a child has been the death penalty. I remember when I was a kid first learning about the death penalty, and I didn't understand why we use it. And
I'm super against it.
yeah, it's barbaric and it's wrong, and I'll tell you why. Because typically when I tell someone, very often when I tell someone that I oppose the death penalty and I think it's horrible, I very often in a conversation with someone who is pro-death penalty will get a response like, oh, come on, Matt, you know if someone murdered someone you were close to, a family member or whomever, you would want that person executed. I very often get a response along those lines. And so I want to be very clear about why I oppose the death penalty. And this will go over some people's heads because some people, when I explain this to them, you know, they immediately go back to that, well, come on, if someone murdered someone you cared about, you'd be for it, completely missing the point of my whole argument against it. Because my entire argument against the death penalty is not the argument, what I call sort of the old line liberal argument, that sort of these esoteric philosophical things like, well, it's not really the, it's not the role of the, or the, it's not the place for the state to make decisions about who lives and who dies, or, you know, just because, or sort of the more simple, almost childlike argument that, well, two wrongs don't make a right.
Hey.
It's none of that. Well, that's some people who oppose it make that argument.
I make that argument. It's
Well,
not my only argument, but
well,
I make it.
That's not why I oppose it.
Well, it's not the
what
only
I'm
reason
saying.
I oppose it, but it's one of the reasons.
Right. But I want to be clear. My reason for thinking that the death penalty is absolutely barbaric and evil and wrong is very, very simple, and it has nothing to do with those other arguments. Because I'll tell you what, if it were not for this one thing, I might actually be okay with the death penalty. But here's my problem with it. The system isn't perfect, and it never will be. People are fallible, and everybody knows that sometimes innocent people are found guilty and sent to prison. And whether anyone wants to acknowledge it or not, it is a well-established fact in this country that in many instances, people have been found guilty of murder and put on death row, and then we find out later, due to someone's recanted testimony or some DNA evidence that's emerged because the technology's come a long way, particularly in the past couple of decades, we find out that, oops, we made a mistake. They're not guilty. Now, at least if someone is in prison but is still with us, at least if you find out later that, well, we goofed, sorry, you didn't really commit that murder, we can't give you back the time that you lost, but at least we can let you out. Once you've executed someone, there is no oops, they're dead. And that is why I oppose the death penalty. It is simply too much of a risk to take with human life, to trust that the system isn't going to be wrong, and that we're not going to accidentally execute someone who, it turns out later, oops, they didn't really commit the murder. That is why I oppose the death penalty. And unfortunately, like I said, sometimes I'll explain this to people and then they'll look at me and say, yeah, Matt, but come on, if someone killed someone you cared about, it's like, well, you didn't listen to anything I just said. No, I wouldn't. I don't want this country executing anybody. And, there's some other things too. It actually costs more to carry out an execution than it does to let someone rot in a prison cell. It's very expensive to execute someone. The court system makes it very expensive, so it's not like you save a bunch of money. There are many issues that I have mixed feelings about. There are many issues that are complicated. There are many issues upon which reasonable people can disagree. But I will say to anyone who is pro-death penalty, the argument that I just made against the death penalty, because it's not a perfect system and it's too much of a risk, I have never in my life heard anyone respond to that with anything that makes me say, oh, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. I have never heard what I would regard as an effective counter-argument to what I just said. I don't know what the counter-argument is. Another thing that just frustrates me to death about this, no pun intended, is that so many people who are pro-death penalty are who you would call, and this is not, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here. I know lots of Christians. My dad is a devout Christian, and my dad feels the same way about the death penalty that I do. But a lot of conservative Christians, pro-life, allegedly conservative Christians, right, who believe that abortion is murder and all this and that, and you have to protect life, a lot of these folks just love the death penalty for whatever reason. As if, it's funny to me. I mean, the very idea that a Christian could be pro-death penalty is just bizarre to me. Because, and I understand a lot of Christians practice what I like to call ironic Christianity, which is where you call yourself a Christian while trying to have as little to do as possible with anything Christ actually tried to teach us. But the idea, if you're a pro-death penalty Christian, I have to ask you this. Would the version of Christ that we're taught about in the Bible, would he approve of executing people? Come to think of it, Christ himself was executed by the state. But apparently that was part of the plan. That's how it was all supposed to happen. But would Christ approve of executing people? I find it hard to believe that he would. I don't think he'd like it much at all. Just like I don't think he'd approve of kicking poor people when they're down at every opportunity and some other things. But I don't think Christ would approve of the death penalty. Not the version of Christ I learned about. I was raised Catholic. I went to a Christian school from grade 2 to grade 8. I was never confirmed, so, but I don't know. I don't think he would approve of it. I find that, I guess what I'm trying to say is I find the death penalty just overwhelmingly un-Christian. And yet, I know a lot of pro-life conservative Christians who not only approve of the death penalty, but speak about it very enthusiastically, especially in Texas. Those evangelical conservative Christians like Governor Rick Perry, oh, they love executing people in Texas. So very Christian, he said sarcastically. This is what infuriated me, and this is kind of old news now, I guess. It popped up about a week ago, but I haven't had a chance to address it until now. Pam Bondi, some of you political junkies like myself might know who she is. The Attorney General, State Attorney General in the great state of Florida. Florida, of course, with its conservative Republican governor, Rick Scott. Pam Bondi is, of course, like Governor Scott, very enthusiastic about the death penalty. You know, look, I got to say it. My core objections to the death penalty aside, the fact that so many people who are pro-death penalty are not only in favor of it, but just really, really enthusiastic about it, it's just plain creepy to me. Aside from it being unchristian, I find it creepy. It's like a weird bloodlust people have with this stuff. But anyway, Pam Bondi, of course, like Governor Scott, very enthusiastic about the death penalty, to the point that this woman has made every effort to kind of speed up the process in Florida in terms of executing these people. Gotta get them dead nice and quick, right? Can't let them lingering around on death row. Let's hurry up and kill them. Those aren't actual quotes. I'm not saying that, but at least those aren't actual quotes of Pam Bondi. I don't want to mislead you. Those are actual quotes of people I've had private conversations with regarding the death penalty who are pro-death penalty. But this is from this was a little editorial from the Tampa Bay Times in Tampa, Florida, obviously. Adam C. Smith, political blogger, wrote this. He said, this is very brief, but I agree with him. He said, there is no graver responsibility and act of state government than an execution. In Florida this week, a campaign fundraiser takes precedence. And again, this was actually last week that this happened. Attorney General Pam Bondi persuaded Governor Rick Scott to postpone an execution scheduled for tonight because it conflicted with her re-election kickoff reception. Yes, that's how seriously they take the death penalty in Florida. Seriously enough to try to speed them up, but in this case, not taking human life seriously enough to let an execution conflict with one's campaign event. Philip Novak, the Ohio mother of one of Michael Lee Gore's victims, when told Monday about the reason for the delay, said this, quote, "What's going on down there, it's ridiculous," unquote. Gore, age 50, raped, strangled, and stabbed 30-year-old Robin Novick in 1998 before dumping her body into a Miami-Dade County trash heap. Gore was also sentenced to die for the slaying of 19-year-old Susan Rourke, whose body was found a few months later in Columbia County. Gore was initially scheduled for execution in June, but the date was twice delayed because of legal skirmishes over Gore's sanity. See, that's part of, by the way, what makes the death penalty expensive is what goes on in court. That adds up to a lot of taxpayer dollars. So you taxpayers who think, oh, we got to hurry up and kill these people and save us some money, you're not saving any money. Mm-hmm. After Governor Scott last month rescheduled the execution for September 10th, the state of Bondi's hometown campaign kickoff at her South Tampa home, Bondi's office asked that it be postponed. The new date is October 1st. Governor Scott said Monday that he did not know the reason for the request, and he declined to answer when asked whether he considers a campaign fundraiser an appropriate reason to reschedule an execution. Why would he answer that? It's not like the people we elect to these offices are accountable to anyone, right? I mean, they should be accountable to us, and we should demand transparency, but we don't, so they're not. Scott said, quote, "When another cabinet officer asks for something, we try to work with them," unquote. On Monday, Bondi responded to questions with a statement saying that she had made a mistake. Oh. Quote, "As a prosecutor, there was nothing more important than seeing justice done, especially when it came to the unconscionable act of murder. I personally," she's bragging now, "I personally put 2 people on death row and, as Attorney General, have already participated in 8 executions since I took office, a role that I take very seriously." This woman is bragging about it. This is that whole bloodlust thing I was talking about. And she's bragging about it to her constituents in Florida because they know that they love it too. Like I said, it's one thing to be pro-death penalty. That's wrong enough as far as I'm concerned because I hate the death penalty. But to be so excited about it, to be bragging about, oh, I executed 8 people and yay. It's creepy, man. Seriously, any of you pro-death penalty freaks out there, how is that not creepy? You conservative Christians who just, you love Jesus and you're so pro-life and you just love killing. Got to kill these people. Pro-life but pro-death at the same time. It's that ironic Christianity I talk about. Let's see. Quote, the planned execution of Michael Lee Gore had already been stayed twice by the courts, and we absolutely should not have requested that the date of the execution be moved, unquote. I'm not even going to read the rest of this. We're almost out of time anyway. It's just, it takes my regard, my level of disgust for the death penalty to a whole new level. It's like, it's bad enough that we execute people with a flawed system in which sometimes innocent people are convicted of things they didn't do. That, on a simple common sense level, makes it bad enough. But then to see it turned to be used for political purposes like this, and for a woman like Pam Bondi, the state attorney general in Florida, to be so blatant with how little regard she has for human life, while fooling all the rubes who think that she obviously has a lot of regard for human life by throwing that whole victims' rights thing in there. She's a good politician, I guess, in a way, because she's playing to her base. But wow. Wow. And, of course, I know a lot of you out there don't agree with anything I just said, and that's fine.
I agree with you, Matt.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So anyway, that's going to wrap up this week's Matt Connarton Unleashed. Don't forget, No Boundaries, Monday night at 10:30 Eastern. Who do you have again? Tell us one more time.
Jessica Valenti.
Okay. So that'll be a big show. Yes. And don't forget, come back today at 4 for Norm and Friends. General Money will be our guest today, so I'll be here with Norm at 4 and Gary at 6. And Gary Hopper, by the way, to his credit, a conservative Republican who used to be pro-death penalty, but if I did not misunderstand something he said on the show once, he has changed positions on that. So good for him. It's not a partisan issue entirely. It tends to skew Republicans like the death penalty and Democrats oppose it, but we've definitely seen a shift. A lot of Republicans now, to their credit, do oppose the death penalty, which is why we've seen it slowly going away in this country. And unfortunately, there are a lot of Democrats who actually like the death penalty. I think politically, though, those are just Democrats who are worried about being tagged as soft on crime. So they use, like Bill Clinton, so shamelessly and unethically and immorally used the death penalty during his 1992 run for the presidency to show that he was tough on crime. He was very pro-death penalty and actually flew back to Arkansas 3 different times, apparently, due to some recent research that I did, to preside over executions, just to show how tough on crime he really was, despite being a liberal Democrat. Just absolutely disgusting. Another example, what he did is even worse, in my view, than what Pam Bondi has done. I voted for him twice, but I'll never forgive him for that. Absolutely horrifying. So, do you know who our guest is next week here?
I have no idea.
All right. Well, it'll be a surprise to all of us. Thank you again to Walter E. Williams for joining us today by phone from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we'll definitely have him on again soon. And that'll do it for this week's Matt Connarton Unleashed. Thanks, everybody. Talk at you later.